Welcome back to Beyond the Bottom Line. I'm your host, Burt Miller, and I am thrilled to welcome today's guest. This guest, his career got started as a Kansas City police officer, then went on to become the lead FBI negotiator, and now is a successful author and entrepreneur and the CEO of Black Swan Group, which is a negotiation consultancy and advisory group. And so he's also been featured on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, uh, all those. And so I'd like us to welcome to the show Mr. Underachiever himself, Chris Voss. Chris, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Bert, thanks for having me on. And maybe someday, if I'm lucky, when somebody introduces me, they talk about the TV I've done, they'll include Sesame Street. I want to be on Sesame Street.
All right, well, that's a good one. My name's Bert. I will be happy to play that role if you'll allow me to join you.
We just got to find an Ernie, right?
Hey, we got to find an Ernie, absolutely. I started hearing that joke a long time ago, Chris, like
Oh,
at
God.
3, you can only imagine. So I had the honor, for those that do not know out there, to host Chris in September, October 2019, kind of right before the world shut down at our national conference in Orlando, Florida. And I have to tell you, Chris, um, you walked off the stage after spending that time, just absolutely entertaining and also educating 550 people, which, by the way, was not an easy task considering this was the last day of the conference. Everybody stood around to see you. And what was really cool, Chris, is that everybody after the show, I got a ton of emails back, phone calls, texts about how approachable you were. You took pictures, and you're very approachable, and the humility that you've shown. So thank you for that. Our network really appreciates it. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. I mean, you had good people there. It was a great feeling there, talking to people that want to learn and want to get better. So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. I was happy to be there.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we were glad to have you and look forward again sometime. After we have a really good year, I can afford you now. I love it. All right, so let's break. I'm going to break today into 3 parts, Chris. I want to talk about your early years and growing up in the upper Midwest. I'm a Midwestern boy, so I can certainly appreciate the values and hard work in the Midwest. I want to hear a little bit about that. Then we'll roll into your learnings and your experiences in the world of work that you worked in as the lead negotiator in the FBI, and then of course you've now transferred your skills and your experience over into being an entrepreneur, author. Let me do this, Chris. I'm going to go ahead and do it for you. It's behind your left shoulder, but
Thank you.
we
Yeah.
have for those who have not read this. I don't know who would not have read this book yet, but if you haven't read it, please see this. Never Split the Difference, Chris Voss. You can get it anywhere, Amazon, pretty easy to get. So,
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely, man. And so, and of course, you run the Black Swan Group, which is a consultancy company. So, oh, I forgot to mention, you also did a master class. I mean, I don't know what else. That's it. That's it. That's all I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to mention anything else. We've done enough. So, you grew up in the Upper Midwest, and I know, when you open the book, ironically enough, you talk about your mother and father and paying tribute to them about the hard work and values and things that they instilled in you growing up in the Midwest. So tell us a little bit about that, Chris, and your journey.
Yeah, well, my father was an entrepreneur. My father and my mom both were just sort of can do it people, figure it out. We got a task. It doesn't matter what the task is. Somebody's got to figure out how to do it. And the Midwest is really a pitch in culture. Like, you go to somebody's house in LA, somebody's house in New York, you got to bring a bottle of wine, you want to be well hosted. Go to somebody's house in the Midwest, you help set the table. You take out the trash, you figure out how to collaborate with people and get the job done. And that was kind of the environment I grew up in. Now the Midwest doesn't have the market cornered on it. You find hardworking blue collar people everywhere. But that was really where I grew up in a really accepting environment. And somebody's got to get this done. It doesn't matter who, whether you like it or not. It just has to be done and figure it out. And that's the kind of environment I grew up in, and which I'm grateful for.
Absolutely. So somewhere within your soul, man, you must have had these characteristics and attributes around negotiation. You must have been one hell of a kid growing up with parents negotiating with applying those
Yeah,
skills.
no, I think Daniel Core wrote a great book called The Talent Code, which is pretty much like everything is learned. There's, maybe there's nothing natural. Like when we come out of the womb, day one on planet Earth, we're pretty much a blank slate, which has a lot to do with nurture. How do people guide us growing up? What do people expect of us? How do they encourage us? Maybe what kind of crazy thoughts they plant in our heads. So if there was anything that I was born with naturally, I like to think that I'm coachable. I can learn. I want to learn how to get the best way to do it. And if you're coachable, you can become a good negotiator. Coachable and hardworking. I've met great negotiators that were not that coachable, but were really hardworking. Just by sheer force of will, they got good at it. Ideally, if you're coachable, you learn a little bit faster. And I was taught to work hard and figure it out, which is coachability.
And that there, folks, is a mic drop for those multi-generation we're all working with today. So if you happen to be a millennial or a Z, man, take that in big time. So let's bridge to your career. How'd you go from the Midwest and then become a Kansas City police officer and then become the lead negotiator for the FBI around the world? I mean, how did you do that?
Yeah, well, you go to I-80 and you make a left. Oh, I saw a movie that inspired me when I was a teenager, Super Cops, about two New York City police officers that were just really creative, innovative guys. And, they put a lot of bad guys in jail, and the community they were in loved them. And at the time where they were was Bed-Stuy, New York, which was, a tough, tough, tough neighborhood at the time, which is a classic example because every community, no matter how tough it is, still most of the people there are good people. Lots of good people in every community. And I was inspired about how creative and innovative these guys were. In hindsight, I didn't realize also they were mavericks. I mean, they just, they were hard to supervise because they were they were mavericks that got the job done. And I've always been a bit of a maverick. But that inspired me, and I'm in Iowa and I'm looking around, what cities can I go to? Everybody's raving about Kansas City. What a great city it is. I steered away from Chicago initially because it's cold in Chicago. You grew up in the Midwest, you hear Chicago radio and they're talking about in the middle of the winter time, don't go out at night because it's so cold, or stay inside. I'm like, the only people outside are the cops and the firemen. So maybe I'll skip there. And I just heard so much good about Kansas City. I went down and applied. Turned out to be a great town, really well run, really good police department. And after being there a couple of years, I got interested in federal law enforcement. My father tweaked my interest. I talked to a Secret Service guy, and a Secret Service guy is like, with the Secret Service, I've traveled all over the world. And I remember thinking, like, you got paid to travel all over the world? Like I barely been out. I've been to Illinois. That's about as far as I've been out of Iowa, maybe Minnesota. So as luck would have it, the serendipity, the universe smiled on me. Secret Service was not hiring, and the FBI was putting on a big hiring push at the time. So I kind of snuck in the door with the crowd. I wanted to be on a SWAT. I was FBI SWAT, hurt my knee, crisis response. We got negotiators. I figured, how hard could it be? I could talk to terrorists. And like anything that somebody makes look easy, especially verbal communication, somebody's really good at it. They make it look easy, and it's a lot more in depth than you think. And hostage negotiation was it was cool. How could I influence somebody to massively change their behavior in a short period of time? And I loved it, and I pursued it really hard. And the program valued self-initiated people were coachable. And one thing, I just kept at it. And if you love something and you're willing to, take the 90-degree turns in pursuit of something you love, you'll get good at it. And that's what I did. I ended up running our international negotiation response for every American that get kidnapped anywhere in the world.
What do you think about that? I mean, most things that we're good at today or great at today, we kind of sucked at one point in time. So
Yeah.
we had to work. You have to keep working at it. That's that resolve and persistence.
You know,
Uh,
if you let me interrupt,
yeah,
that brings up a really good point because um, at this hostage negotiation is emotional intelligence communication, and here's how bad I sucked at it when I first started. I was told that I had to go volunteer on a suicide hotline or I'd never get into the program. So I'm like, cool, I'll do that. Found a crisis hotline originally founded by Norman Vincent Peale and his wife. So at the very beginning of the training, they give us 10 possible responses or 10 possible things somebody in a hotline might say. You write down the response, what you would say in return. My handwriting, when they handed me that paper back and I wrote down and I looked at what I wrote down, if my handwriting, because I look like I write with my feet, I've gotten teased about that a lot. It's really distinctive. If I didn't know that was my handwriting, I'd have said, who was the idiot that wrote that down? That's how bad I was at emotional intelligence communication before I was taught. Once I got taught just 2 months earlier, I'd forgotten how dumb I was. That's how bad I was at it when I first started.
yeah, and after that, uh, negotiating some of the biggest and most, from a notoriety perspective, situations in the world with hostages. Pretty amazing. So as we think about where we've been over the last period of time, year and a half, 2 years, anytime in negotiation, you mentioned in your book, you called about tactical empathy. Can you
Yeah,
talk a little bit about the tactical empathy? Because I find that interesting because there's compassion and things that tied to that
right.
that end up working with negotiation and when you're trying to what you would think insert power when really you're listening and showing empathy.
Yeah, yeah. Empathy is about connection. Um, and it's a fine line. It's not necessarily sympathy or compassion. Like empathy is a very compassionate thing to do. You got to connect first. And empathy is about connection. We threw the word tactical in there principally because, when empathy was first designed as a concept, which is really about hearing the other side out, not agreeing, not even liking, but really connecting to what they're saying. And then they invented neuroscience and we mapped out neuroscience. And in hostage negotiation, we used to take the approach that, well, look for the loss. That's what's going to be motivating the other side first. And we figured that was just about hostage takers and bad guys. But then when we found out about neuroscience, and then Danny Kahneman gets a Nobel Prize in behavioral economics, saying that loss is the single biggest driver of human decision making. And I'm like, holy cow. That's not because it was hostage takers, it was because they were human beings. And so this empathy becomes a really powerful tool if you can release it from liking, agreeing, or even sympathizing. Then it's an unlimited skill.
Yeah, and so staying with that theme, Chris, um, and staying with the book for just a moment, the heart and mind part of the book, when you start talking about the FBI, you guys started moving toward emotion, right?
Yeah.
And so you guys discussed a bit around the discovery of System One, which
Yeah.
was really really quick and really about emotion, right? And System Two, and you'll have to explain it in more detail, was a little bit around slow and logical. And the objective is to affect System One, which is that quick emotional piece, so you can guide them in System Two along the path of making a logical decision.
Yeah, and the fact that they're intertwined, and instead of looking at them as being in opposition, look at them as enhancements to one another. Because your two thinking, your deep, in-depth thinking, Danny Kahneman would call it slow thinking. It's really based on your deep core values, what you care about, which then by definition means that system one and emotions or feelings. Neuroscientists are trying to distinguish emotions from feelings. Like, that's too complicated for me. I don't know the difference. But those are intertwined in how we guide our in-depth logical thinking, how we come to conclusions. So instead of fighting it or trying to pretend like they don't exist, it's understand how they either enhance or hold back. Like positive emotions, you're 31% smarter in a positive frame of mind. Sean Acker, Harvard psychologist, TED Talk, The Happiness Advantage. That's where I get that stat. 31% smarter in a positive frame of mind, which kind of means in a negative frame of mind, you're dumber. And then there's a fair amount of neuroscience experiments that back that right up and prove it over and over again. Then the double whammy of being dumber in a negative frame of mind, you're probably also more self-righteous, which means not only are you wrong, but you're even more convinced in your righteousness about being wrong, which is kind of a crazy downward spiral. But your original question, if we look at these things as being intertwined, and then strategically or tactically, separate what enhances and what holds us back, then we got a better handle on how somebody's going to make a decision.
It's interesting when you talk about that's interesting. So a positive state of mind is 31% smarter. So that means you're negative. You must be dumber. That is incredibly interesting from my perspective, because when you think about the system one in motion and the intertwined of being the slow and logical thinking, what made you guys, or what led you to put that together when the by the book, the negotiation, the tactical application and behaviors and all the science had other pieces. And I understand from reading the book, of course, is that we were not having success out in the field, and that kind of made us ask questions. So that kind of led to that. But how did it come together the way that it did?
It was a lot of it had to do with the leadership that was running the operation when I was there. Gary Nessner was my immediate boss. He had a lot of support, all the way up to the director of the FBI. The next boss of the division was a guy named Roger Nisley, and then Louis Free. And they wanted us to get better, and they encouraged us to get better. And Gary changed the hostage negotiation world and said, this is crisis negotiation, and just really remade the hostage negotiation world into the recognition that these were crises and we needed to approach it. Now, this ends up being right up my alley, because I was told to volunteer in a crisis hotline. So I roll into the unit, and Gary's very encouraging, wants us to get better and get smarter. So we have, at about the time we have a really big failure in a kidnapping in the Philippines, and I know that we've done everything we know how to do. So we got to start looking on the outside. I stumble over Jim Camp's book, Start With No. I stumble across Bob Mnookin's book, Beyond Winning. He's running the program on negotiation at Harvard. And I'm seeing a complete agreement between the hostage negotiators, the academic Harvard people, and Jim Camp is a layman. And we're all saying it's built around the same thing. We're using different terminology, but it's all about empathy and emotional intelligence. And so, fortunately, with Gary's encouragement, I was given the opportunity to run with this as hard as I could. And we just started collaborating pretty much simultaneously with both the people at Harvard and with Jim Camp to evolve what we were doing.
Man, for business leaders out there, I want you to go back during this interview and connect the dots. You heard Chris talk about coachable. You mentioned that two or three times. He talked about he was surrounded by leaders that were empowering the team with the mission and objective to get better. And all that led to is a turn of events of negotiation that Chris helped lead, that then started saving lives, and as being the rule versus the opposite side of the coin. So again, think about that: coaching, empowerment, leadership and giving people an objective and giving them the runway to do it. Man, that's a great message. Love that. You know what's interesting? Also, one of the best lines in the book, and again, I'll get away from the book here in a second, but I just loved it, and you may have shared it with us in Orlando. Have you ever tried to devise a mutual win-win solution with a guy who thinks he's the Messiah? Now, when you think about system one, system two, how does it work with somebody like that?
Yeah, well, really, if you get out of your own way, if you're bent out of shape over the guy who thinks he's the Messiah, then you got an ego contest. How dare you think you're the Messiah? A lot of it is getting out of your own way. And then really, one of the real tricks is how do you make your objective the path to their objective? If for you to get what you want, if what I want is on the way, then you don't have a problem with what I want. And which means let's get out of this win-lose thing entirely. Win-lose, bargaining, zero-sum game, negotiation. And I don't like the term win-win because of the way it's become used in vernacular. But positive sum game, surprises, how to surprise, a surprise is an opportunity. Black Swan, what's something different in there? Like if you could have convinced David Koresh that by letting everybody go, and not setting everybody on fire, that he would have become the world's greatest religious leader and everybody would have bowed down to him, he probably wouldn't have set that place on fire, or any other given leader. What's your objective? Don't make your objectives in opposition. Make your objectives the path to where they want to be. And it's so much of it is just in our heads that the possibilities there are much more open as long as we are willing to at least have a look at the other side's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's an everyday negotiation, folks, that we can use with our children, friends, business. I mean, that's something we do every single day. So before we leave the FBI, Chris, I have to ask you a question. You do several of these. I've seen quite a few. You're on stage, you're talking, people talk to you after you present. You've done podcasts, you've done interviews. What I've not seen you do is answer a question from yourself. So if you were sitting in my shoes and you were Chris asking Chris a question, what's the one question you've not been asked about the journey of your life that you would ask yourself?
Yeah, I've been asked a couple of times, how would you change? What would you do differently? I'd just be nicer. I probably wouldn't do anything differently. I'd be nicer about it. I'm still looking for insights on what we're doing. I'm still trying to figure out the right path. I mean, how do we call attention to the things that we want? How do we still help people as much as possible? I mean, we're starting to circle back into these days, helping law enforcement a little bit more. The application of empathy across the board. Who can we collaborate with? Stephen Kotler's out there. You're out there. Who's trying to help people do a better job? And I know I'm probably rambling, but I'm looking for a new insight every day into what we're doing. And a lot of it is going back to ground we've been over again and being willing to take a different look at things.
Well, thank you. And what I appreciate the most is you haven't figured it all out. You continue and challenge yourself to continue to learn, and that's a lesson we can just take from that answer. All of us could, from that matter. All right. So now moving to your entrepreneurial side. All of a sudden you were a police officer, you ended up becoming the lead negotiator, the FBI, and now you are a businessman like Dad, right? Like your father. And so you owned a Black Swan consulting firm. So how did you move your path and journey from being a police officer, FBI, and then all of a sudden now you are running a company, starting a company, successful company at that, and leading and building your organization as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, some of the key points, like first of all, people coming out of public sector into the private sector, like we got no idea what's going on, really what it takes to be successful in business. So ideally, you got a cushion. Like I had a pension that could pay some of my bills. I started teaching while we were trying to figure it out. And then a real critical issue, you want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go as a team. Like, fortunately, I could always trust my son. I got him involved in my company early on, and I at least had a wingman to begin with. And then we started adding to the team. Looking back, the crisis negotiation unit under Gary Nestner, we were a phenomenal team, and we liked to work really well together. So we started assembling the team. The book, Never Split the Difference, that was it. That's a team effort. Tall Roz, genius writer. Brandon's massive amount of input, my son, on the content of the book. Good agent, Steve Ross. This team, then we bring Harper Collins on board. Sometimes you take your team for granted, but after a while, then you begin to see, all right, these people have always been there for me. And then really the next critical move forward for the company, there's a guy that I knew, Jonathan Smith, who's an entrepreneurial operating system coach. And I knew him professionally before we hired him as a business coach. And I knew that I liked him and I trusted him. It's kind of a cliche. You don't do business with friends, but you better become friends with the people you do business with. Started doing business, became friends with him. And then when we put his system, the EOS system, into our company, that's when it really took off. And everybody that I know that has started put EOS into their company, they're like 6 months in, they're like, holy cow, things are operating better than I ever imagined. Like in EOS, we communicate easily 10 times as much as I did when I was in the government as a team. Now, I always looked at that as wasted time in the government. We don't waste any time in our communication. It's all structured, it's action oriented, it's next steps oriented. And that was really pulling together a team and then having a good system to operate under really made the biggest difference for the Black Swan Group.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And there are probably private folks gone to private situations, and they don't lead quite as effective as somebody coming from the public domain into the private sector. So kudos to you on that. And the other thing I'm gonna take away from that is, you go fast alone and far as a team. So
Yeah.
I love that quote. Love that quote. All right, so you work with people, you talk to these companies. Many of these companies have these managers, senior managers, leaders, and C-suite folks, and you've made a career out of difficult conversation. That's not many of your conversations have not been difficult, or certainly have a certain level of stress and tension around them. So, from your background, Chris, from that, um, what conversations have you found been most difficult for you to have in your life?
Well, if I start getting annoyed at somebody, um, I'll blame the other side for, saying one thing and doing another. And if I start getting annoyed at them, like we've had a great verbal conversation and then somebody shot me an agreement and it does not resemble in any way, shape, or form the conversation, I'll start to get bent out of shape. Or if I find out they're lowballing me or offer me far less than they should be, I'll start getting bent out of shape. And then if I get bent out of shape, then I'm going to do a bad job on the interactions. And we just had an interaction with a company we're doing business with 2 interactions ago. I was upset with them, and I started telling them what my criteria for being justifiably upset was, and it was not a great conversation. The very next conversation, we go back to our best model of team negotiations. Brandon and I go back and forth on it. He's not bent out of shape. I let him take the lead in the communication. And the very next communication we have with him was wonderful. Everybody got back on track. We got out of this criteria, why I think I'm right, why they think I'm wrong. I mean, this outside criteria thing is just it's a
Yeah.
guaranteed argument. And we went back to emotional intelligence approach led by my son, who was less involved in all the interactions. And we had a 17-minute conversation. The last one was 90 minutes. And in 17 minutes, we ended up in a great position by using the empathy approach that I had forgotten about because I got bent out of shape.
Right. So, Brandon, if you're watching this, you deserve a bonus. Just
Yes, he does.
yeah, no doubt. So, what's the most rewarding experience, Chris, um, in your professional business setting that you brought from the FBI crisis leadership and/or as a police officer? Something you brought forward, or even you can go back to your earlier years and growing up in the Upper Midwest. What is one thing today that is your anchor, your North Star that's brought you where you are?
Yeah, well, probably there were a couple of interactions when I saw effective verbal communication, it really made a big difference on people. Like when I was a cop on a police department, for a variety of reasons internally, they kicked a whole bunch of detectives out of the detective bureau. There was an internal dispute as to whether or not being a detective was a promotion. One of the contentions the detectives said why it was a promotion and they should be getting paid more was none of them ever got rotated out of the detective bureau back out onto the street. Well, the police department said, "Oh, okay, we'll solve that. We'll rotate all you guys back out onto the street." That was bad for them, but I ended up in a police car with a guy who was great at tone of voice and soft skills approach. And I saw him unravel situations with this soft approach as opposed to a commanding approach faster than I ever did. I think back to that guy all the time. Great tone of voice. I was taught as a cop, be commanding, have a commanding presence, solve it and move on. And there's a lot of friction to that approach. And, this guy came out, with this great tone of voice and a soft approach, and we'd spend less time on any call than I ever had previously, and we probably wouldn't go back. And I remember that guy an awful lot and to what a difference that would make on solving problems in a way that actually went faster and occurred with less, reoccurring frequency, to butcher the English language.
Yeah, and that's something you've done, Chris. I mean, you think about your cadence, um, the voice, whether you go a little faster, a little slower as the cadence, or a little bit higher decibel, or bring a little bit lower voice. I mean, you've mastered that. So you have brought that along with you. Think about that. That comes from your days back in KC. So I know the ribs took you to KC in a little bit warmer weather, but you obviously walked with some golden nuggets. That's outstanding. So I know that you've got obviously the Black Swan Group. They're on the talk circuit, keynote circuit. You got the master class. You're a best-selling author, and I understand you have a newsletter. You're also going to be creating, or talk to me about that, and how can we see what you're doing there?
Yeah, well, the newsletter is one of our favorite tools because people get a long way with just the book and the newsletter alone. Newsletter's free, it's concise, it's actionable. I mean, like I used to get the daily 10-point briefing from the Wall Street Journal, and there was so much in it. I didn't even open it up because I knew that I was going to be exhausted if I worked my way through it. The newsletter is one concise, actionable article, and it happens to be the gateway to everything that the Black Swan Group does. Gateway to the website, blackswanltd.com. Um, Lots of free training. Like wherever you are, if you're learning the Black Swan method, wherever you are on your journey, we'll meet you where you are. Now, if I may, the simplest way to subscribe to the newsletter, you just shoot out a text message. It's a text to subscribe function. The message you send is Black Swan method, 3 words, spaces in between, not cap sensitive. Black Swan method to 33777. 33777. is a number you text to. If I've described it properly, you should get a text response asking for your email. And then whatever you need, wherever you are in your negotiation journey, will meet you where you are.
Oh, that's outstanding. Maybe I should do that right now. It's just
See if it works, huh?
yeah, see if it worked.
Call me out.
Yeah, no. I think it's great. So anyhow, I really appreciate you joining me, Chris. This has been a lot of fun.
Right.
Anything that you would like to share before we wrap up, man? I want to give you the floor for a moment if you want it.
Yeah, negotiation's a perishable skill, number one. Number two, you're either succeeding because of your negotiation skills or in spite of them. If you're not studying it and it's a perishable skill, well, you're probably succeeding in spite of them. And here's what I would share with you on a perishable skill. Whatever factor it is, when the sun comes up tomorrow, you're going to be in one of three places. And this is not Chris Voss. This is not the Black Swan Group. This is our universal law of human existence. You're either going to be better, you're going to be worse, or you're going to be the same. 2 out of 3 of those positions require effort. The same, worse, or better. If you're not putting effort into it, there's only one outcome. Not a lot, but you got to put something into it. You can get better without that much extra effort. And the guy that I talked about earlier, Jonathan Smith, we're now coaching him in negotiation. He told me recently he sees the world in a whole different way and he's enjoying it a lot more.
That's outstanding, Chris. And I need to be introduced to EOS, by the way. Chris, thank you so much. This was absolute fire. Thank you for hanging out with me. I really do appreciate it. So thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Bert.
This is Beyond the Bottom Line. I'm your host, Bert Miller.